All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Texas History. Today, we're going to be talking about early statehood and the issues that Texas is going to face as a state. So, our goal for today is that students will be able to identify the issues faced by the early statehood of Texas. The specific success criteria for you today in this class is to be able to identify the main issues that the new state of Texas is going to face. At this point, you should have already done your do now and your vocab test. So if those have not been completed, go ahead and pause the video now and do those two things. You will find the Google form for the quiz in Classroom. But if those have been done, our agenda for today is to do the do now with the vocab test. Then we're going to take these notes. After that, there will be a worksheet you do for the annexation of Texas. And then if there's still extra time, you can play the book it in Classroom. It's just a review of the presidents of Texas. Now, I want to remind you guys that next week we will be having a unit review, okay? So you need to be studying for that as well. Understand that it'll be covering everything we've talked about since January. So all of the Republic of Texas stuff when Texas was its own nation, as well as the things we're going to talk about today with early statehood. Another thing I want to tell you guys about is grades. I know that I was planning to have the grades done for that Alamo video on Tuesday, but I have a lot of things to grade. I'm currently grading for 12 different classes right now, so please give me a little bit of time as I'm getting all of this done. But two of the things we'll do today are for grades, the vocab test and the annexation worksheet. So there will be 4 grades going in the grade book as soon as I can get them in, including these two. It will be the Manifest Destiny assignment, the Alamo video questions, the annexation of Texas worksheet, and the vocab test. Whew. All right. With all that said, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to start off with is the Treaty of Annexation in April of 1844. Texas is going to become an American territory, which isn't the same as a state, on December 29th, 1845. A territory is basically like a state on probation. It can only become a state after there's a certain number of people that settle the state. So when Texas first joins, it's not there's not enough residents in Texas to be a state, but they'll quickly move there. We'll talk about population a little bit more later in the slideshow. In exchange for becoming a territory, America would pay off all debts, which was about $12 million, and take control of all the public lands in Texas. And if you recall from the other day when we were talking about Lamar at the end of his presidency, the debt is $7 million. By the end of Anson Jones' presidency, it will be $12 million. And if you do the math, that's over $400 million today. So it was a lot of money, even back then. Some of these public lands that the United States take control of in Texas are going to be sold to private individuals and other companies as a way to pay off some of that $12 million of debt. So Texas becomes a territory. America takes all this land. America assumes the debt that the country of Texas had and starts selling land to pay off that debt. After each one of these slides, I'm going to take a brief pause. Feel free to pause the video if you need to take notes. Once everybody's good, you can just go ahead and hit resume. So we've talked a lot about Manifest Destiny. Manifest Destiny, again, as a little bit of review, is this idea that America should expand from East Coast to West Coast, sea to shining sea, Atlantic to Pacific. Most Texans and Americans did not oppose the annexation, but Britain and Mexico would. Britain is just another word for England, if you don't know, the country that America fought its war for independence against. But Britain was worried about how powerful America was becoming. They thought that they could maybe get better trade deals if the Republic of Texas would have stayed independent rather than if Texas became a state. And then Mexico had a lot of issues with this. Mexico was already cautious and worried about the United States and its rapid expansion of territory with things like the Louisiana Purchase about 50 years earlier. So they did not like the idea of the United States getting closer to their border. Also, after the Texas Revolution, Mexico had never recognized the independence of Texas. They did not want more Americans in Texas, they didn't want the border to be closer to Mexico, and they did not like Texas becoming a state. That YouTube link on the bottom will take you to a video if you're viewing the slides in Google Classroom, but it's not required to watch it for this lesson. It's just a little extra cartoon about Manifest Destiny. So here's a map of the way the United States is going to look by 1850. So if you look at the map, all of the pink will be the United States, and the yellow is going to be territories that the United States own. The Mexican cession is part of Mexico before the stuff we're going to talk about, but after we get through everything and we get to September 9th, 1850, that little date at the bottom, you'll see that Mexico loses a lot more territory to the United States than just Texas. So, with Texas becoming a state, that means Texas needs a state constitution. Texas already had a constitution that they wrote for the Republic of Texas, but now that they're a state, they need a state constitution. So the leaders in Texas get together, they write a new constitution, which gets sent to the U.S., and the U.S. approves that constitution in the fall of 1845. Some of the specifics are going to be that governors in Texas are elected to 2-year terms, similar to the way that Texas had presidents. There's going to be a bicameral legislature, which is a big word that just means they're going to take the lawmaking part of Texas, the group of people that decide on laws, and they're going to split it into two parts: the House of Representatives and the Senate. In the House of Representatives, you had to be 21 years old and you could serve for 2 years. In the Senate, you had to be 30 years old, but you served for 4-year terms. So if you got the job, you'd be a senator for 4 years, but if you got a job in the House of Representatives, you'd only have it for 2 years. There would be a Supreme Court in Texas, and the legislature is going to provide and support for the maintenance of public schools. We talked about Lamar becoming the father of Texas education and setting aside a bunch of land for them to build public schools on. A lot of those public schools are going to start being built after Texas becomes a state, so they'll help that process along. So, some politics, all right? James Pinckney Henderson is going to be the first governor of Texas. And there's basically two major parties in Texas, okay? The Democrats want annexation. They liked the idea of Texas being part of the United States. They wanted slavery, and they were in favor of a smaller national government. They wanted less rules over what they could and couldn't do in the state. The Whigs were a party in Texas that were against annexation. They wanted Texas to remain independent. They were against slavery, and they wanted a larger national government. This is also an important note here that I've added on the slide. Women, African Americans, Native Americans, and Tejanos are not allowed to vote in Texas. Tejanos meaning people that live in Texas that were of Mexican descent. So, who does this leave in Texas that can vote? The only people in Texas that are allowed to vote are white men, Anglo American men. No one else can vote. So, there are some issues between the state government and the federal government, between the Texas government and the United States government. Okay? Texas is going to get more say in politics in the 1850s. They're going to be able to vote on a lot more issues. The federal government, the American government, is going to relocate many Native Americans to reservations inside Texas and some of the Indian territories, which now would be like Oklahoma, Kansas, that part of the U.S. north of Texas. A lot of that is going to become Indian reservations. Native Americans in Texas would often leave these reservations to raid settlements in Texas, and in return, the Army is going to establish a bunch of forts across the American frontier on the edge of the Great Plains. Keep in mind at this point that a lot of these Native Americans that are raiding are not just the native tribes to Texas, like Comanche, Apache, Kiowa. It's also going to be tribes that are moved to Texas. Other tribes are going to be forced out of other parts of the United States and put on reservations here. So there's going to be a lot of different cultures that all of a sudden have to live together and work together in this new place. That's going to bring us around to the U.S. Mexican War. In the U.S. Mexican War, Mexico does not declare war on the United States, despite them threatening to do so after annexation. Many of the biggest problem before the U.S. Mexican War starts is that the United States and Texas do not agree with Mexico on where exactly the border of Texas is. Because remember, Mexico never recognized Texas independence, so they saw Texas as part of Mexico that was just rebelling. So, Texas and the United States believe that the southern border of Texas should be the Rio Grande River, whereas Mexico believes that the southern border of Texas should be the Nueces River. The United States also thinks that Mexico should have to pay for all the damage caused by the Mexican forces during the revolution. This is something that the United States wants from Mexico. So, the U.S. president is going to send this guy named John Slidell. You don't need to remember his name. His name does not need to be in your notes. He's going to send this guy to Mexico to discuss what the new border of Texas is going to be, as well as the border between Texas and the Mexican Cession Territory. All of that land that is part of Utah, California, Nevada, Arizona, and Mexico. All of that land belongs to Mexico at the time, but the United States is just trying to just figure out exactly where that border is going to be. The Mexican president Herrera did not want to give up any land because he thought it would make him look weak. So he did not send anybody to meet with the Americans. Polk sends this guy down to Mexico to talk about these borders, and no one talks to him. While he's down in Mexico, President Polk is going to order a commander, one of the commanders of the American forces in Texas, Zachary Taylor. You'll talk about him more in 8th grade, so it might do you some good to just go ahead and jot that name down here. But he's going to send this general across the Nueces River, which Mexico thinks is the border of Texas and Mexico. So the Mexican government views this general and his soldiers crossing this river as an act of war, right? You have a different army of soldiers marching onto your land, is how they see it. So they're going to declare war. The United States is going to declare war on Mexico after a little bit of fighting on May 13th, 1846. These guys cross a river. They have a short fight with the Mexican army. The Mexican army sees this as, oh, we're being attacked. And in response to this, Texas is going to officially declare war on Mexico, May 13th, 1846. So, There are some key battles of the U.S.-Mexican War. You do not have to write these in your notes, but you may just want to keep like a short bulleted list. But the U.S.-Mexican War is a pretty short war. It only lasts a few years. You've got the Battle of Palo Alto, where America wins its first battle, and then Resaca de la Palma and the Battle of Monterrey following after. Both of these are American victories. So, after the Battle of Monterrey, General Taylor and the Mexican commander at that battle agree to an armistice, which is basically like a ceasefire. They're going to stop fighting, but President Polk rejects it. There's another battle that's an American victory. The general and President Santa Anna is going to lead the Mexican forces during the Battle of Chapultepec Castle. I think that's how you say it. But he's going to lead the forces there on that battle of September 12th to 13th in 1847, and it's going to be another American victory. So you can see at that point that the American army was much better trained and equipped than the Mexican army, so they win most of the battles, which is going to result in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo is the document that ends the U.S.-Mexican War, and it is signed on February 2nd, 1848. In this treaty, Mexico gives up all claims to Texas. They completely lose it, and they give up on it. They say, yes, it can become part of the United States. We'll stop fighting over it. We don't want any trouble. They're going to call the Rio Grande the official border between Texas and Mexico, and that's what the border is today, between Texas and Mexico. Now, all of the territory in the Pacific Ocean, or not in the ocean, all of the territory between Texas and the Pacific Ocean, so everything from New Mexico to California that was part of Mexico is going to be given to Texas as part of something called the Mexican Cession. Okay? The Mexican Cession is where all of this land is given to the United States, and the United States agrees to pay Texas $15 million for it. So, big takeaways for the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. The Rio Grande is the boundary between Texas and Mexico. Mexico gives up claims to Texas, and the United States gets the Mexican Cession, and all that Mexico gets is just $15 million, which for that amount of land at that time was not a lot of money. All Mexican citizens living in this land from New Mexico to California are going to be guaranteed rights of American citizenship, and they're given a full year to decide if they want to stay in America, because it's America now, and become part of the United States, or if they would rather go south and return to Mexico. They'll have a year to decide if they want to be American or Mexican citizens. So here's that map again we were looking at, and you can see that Mexican Cession territory on the left is all of the land that was given to the United States along with Texas after the Mexican War, or the U.S.-Mexican War. So, 2 years after the war, the United States is going to decide on something called the Compromise of 1850. Okay? The Southerners want the land admitted as part of the Mexican Cession to be all slave states, while the Northerners want it to be free states. Because remember, we talked about that delicate balance in U.S. politics where they want to keep equal numbers of states as slave states and as free states so that neither side can make laws over the other. If there's a majority in Congress, if there's more states that have representatives in Congress, because remember, each state gets to send a person to Congress, and that's how they vote on laws. All these people from across the United States get together and they vote on laws. Okay, the first half is going to be, or half of it will be slave states and half of it will be free states. If there's too much of an unbalance, that means that that side gets to make all the rules. So they're going to come to a compromise known as the Compromise of 1850. In the Compromise of 1850, California is going to get added as a free state. The rest of that territory is going to be split up, And the people that live there are going to get to vote and decide. So if you live in Arizona, the people in Arizona vote on whether they want to be a slave state or not. If you live in New Mexico, they put it to a vote whether it'll be a slave state or not. Texas is going to give up its claims to New Mexico in exchange for $10 million to pay off the Texas debt. That's going to be called the Pierce Plan. And then the Gadsden Purchase is going to be where they purchase the small piece of land from from Mexico in order to build a railroad. So I'm going to go back a slide real quick and we'll talk more about the Gadsden Purchase. So if you look at this map and you look over there on the west side of Texas, that little gray part that says Mexico is the land that they're going to purchase in the Gadsden Purchase. At the time, the United States carried a lot of people and supplies across the United States using railroads. That was the main way that goods and people were transported across the U.S. Because of the Rocky Mountains and the desert, the Mexican Cession did not have good land to build a railroad that could go from Texas to California. So, the United States is going to come back later after the Compromise of 1850, after the U.S.-Mexican War, and it's going to buy that little gray piece of land that will be the Gadsden Purchase. And the only reason they buy it is to build a railroad. So here is another picture of that Gadsden Purchase, just to kind of give you a better idea of where it is. You can see that it is the southern part of Arizona and New Mexico now. The Texas Homestead Act was a law at the time that allowed settlers to have land as long as they lived on it and improved it. So you could move to a part of Texas that was not claimed, and if you built a house, dug a well, did anything like that, then you claimed the land. You could own the land. This was very popular and led a lot of people who did not have a lot of money to go to Texas because if you could not afford your own land, you could move to Texas and just find land that nobody owned, and you could claim it through the Texas Homestead Act. So this is going to be something that gets a lot of people to want to come to Texas in the first place. So, population in Texas. In 1850, after the U.S.-Mexican War, the population in Texas is going to be over 200,000 people. 10 years later, it's going to triple to 600,000 people. So there are a lot of people moving into Texas. A lot of settlers were from southern states. Most of the people that move to Texas are going to come from other places in the South, like Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia. A lot of times these settlers are going to leave signs on their house that say GTT or Gone to Texas. The population was very diverse. It's going to include a lot of Latino people from Mexico, as well as European immigrants and people from the southern United States. So over the course of these 10 years, from 1850 to 1860, you have a lot of people going to Texas from everywhere. A lot of German immigration is going to come to Texas, and Irish immigration. Those are two different countries in Europe. So if you look, here's a picture. This is obviously a much more modern picture. This is not from 1860. Do not get it confused. But you can see even today when people move to Texas, they can still do stuff like this sometimes. But it would look something like this. They would paint on the door, or they would nail a sign to the door that says "Gone to Texas." So here's a map of where everyone went when they got to Texas. Some of the words down here are a little bit harder to read. If you view the slides in Google Classroom, you may be able to see them better. But all of the red is basically Anglo-American. This is your white people from the United States. The red checkered is going to be African-American people that are brought into Texas. The green is going to be Indian, like Native American peoples. And then all of those little purple splotches and pink splotches are places that people settled from Europe. So you've got German, Swedish, Danish, Czech, Italian, Polish, Irish, English, a little bit of everything. There's all kinds of people that move to Texas, and this is kind of where they settle. Like I said, you may be able to get a better view of this if you look at it in the slides in classroom. Many Mexican Texans are going to face discrimination after the revolution, including Martin de Leon's family. If you remember, he was one of the impresarios that we talked about who first settled Texas. His family's ranch is going to be taken by Anglo Americans. Texas was not a fun place for a lot of people to live. At the time, there were over 160,000 African Americans living in Texas that were slaves. Out of that 169,000, 1,000 or less were actually free. So almost all of the African Americans in Texas were slaves. Further than this, Texas is going to pass some laws that restrict free African Americans from moving to Texas. So things like the Homestead Act that allowed poor people to get land that they maybe could not afford anywhere else in Texas, that is not going to apply to African Americans. The people in Texas do not want more free African Americans living there. Some Native American groups from other parts of the United States are going to get moved to reservations in Texas. But those in West Texas, like Apache, Comanche, and Kiowa, are going to remain free. So when we're talking about slavery and discrimination in Texas, I'm going to go back a few slides because I want to bring you back all the way to this slide, okay? You have laws against certain types of people owning land or property in Texas, but you got to think about who is actually passing those laws. Remember, the only people in Texas that are voting are white male men, okay? Nobody else is allowed to vote. So, who is going to get to decide who gets land and everything? Anglo-American men, all right? Which means that a lot of African Americans, Native Americans, and Tejanos in Texas do not have a voice and they do not have a say in the laws that are being passed. So we're going to go back forward. And that's going to be the end of our presentation for today. The next thing that I want to bring your attention to is this painting. Okay, this is a painting of the annexation of Texas. Just like we did with the Manifest Destiny thing, it's split up into 4, so you may want to use a Chromebook to look at these pictures in the slides to help you out with this next part. So, the next thing that we're going to do is this annexation of Texas worksheet. Okay? The way this worksheet works is that on the front you have this painting, and then on the back you have 9 questions to answer. Just like the Manifest Destiny one, I expect these to be in full sentences. The Manifest Destiny one we did in a Google form, and I think that really confused a lot of people, judging by the responses that I've seen from it in my classes and in y'all's classes. So this time we're going to print it out and do it on a piece of paper. Okay? So you look at the painting, you answer these questions. When this is printed, you'll notice that it's a little bit harder to read this painting. So that's why these slides are going to be in Google Classroom for you to use. And it's split up into the 4 sections just like it was before, as well as giving you the full picture. So you can use that to work on the worksheet. When you get done with this, if you're done with everything that we've done today, the vocab test, the notes, and the annexation worksheet, which is what goes with this painting. Then after that, you can go ahead and use that booklet to study for that test we have coming up next week. All right. Well, thanks so much for your time, guys.